Hello and welcome to the Providence College Podcast. I'm your host, Liz Kay, and I'm joined by producer Chris Judge, campus videographer, and member of the class of 2005. Each episode of the Providence College Podcast features interesting members of the Fryer family. This week, we're joined by campus minister Bob Pfunder of the class of 2009 and senior Tashiyra Freeman, both here to talk about PC's NOLA Immersion program, a service opportunity through PC's campus ministry. Tashiyra and Bob just returned from their trip in January. Bob, thanks so much for joining us.
Glad to be here.
Can you start us off by telling us a little bit about the history of the program and its goals?
Yeah, well, so Hurricane Katrina struck in 2005, and to my knowledge of the origins of the program, there was some commitment from the university of assisting New Orleans in its reconstruction, redevelopment process. And I believe it was in January 2009, don't quote me on the year exactly, but May Griffiths, then a campus minister, now associate director of Feinstein, then a campus minister in the Office of Campus Ministry, founded this program where she brought a group of students down to New Orleans to kind of immerse into New Orleans culture, kind of ask larger questions of justice and faith, but also to assist in the reconstruction process right after. So we've been going every year since, and I think over the course of the last 10 or so years, we've cultivated a number of really great partnerships and friendships within the city that kind of have enriched our immersion program.
And can you tell me a little bit about the work they're doing and what we're hoping they will gain from it?
Yeah. So, I mean, you think, it's 2017? You think it's 12 years ago? Why are there still reconstruction happening? And it is. So a lot of the work that we do, at least during the days, we work with two organizations over the course of the week that are focused exclusively on reconstruction. So one is the St. Bernard Project, now known as SBP, that essentially worked in St. Bernard Parish, which is right next to New Orleans Parish. It had 100% building destruction in the course of Katrina. And they are a nonprofit, started just shortly after the storm, and they basically do reconstruction of homes. So these are for owners, owner-occupied, but also they've kind of branched out into new areas where they work with members of the community that maybe had to leave New Orleans or in rentals, but had homes before or were in rentals in the area. And they're buying homes that maybe are unoccupied at the moment, and they're rebuilding them and allowing them to kind of find a way to move back into the community, right? So they're trying to reconstruct, but recreate these communities in some ways, and still doing this 12 years out, right? And then we work with another organization called lower9.org, which is working exclusively in the Lower Ninth Ward, doing very similar work. And they provide essentially free volunteer labor. And one of the goals of that is, the owners they can help them get grants if they can, provide the materials to rebuild the house, and then you get rid of a large cost of what it is to move back and slowly trying to kind of rebuild the population back in that neighborhood. So those are two of the organizations. We work with four over the course of the week, but yeah, so in terms of the reconstruction work, that's essentially what we're doing.
And so why bring students there? What are you hoping they'll gain from this experience?
Yeah, I think a lot of reasons. Well, first, I think it's a large and outstanding kind of justice issue that there's still work that needs to be done. And I think volunteer labor fits in really well with kind of how the development has been going on with these organizations. But I also think that this program is unique in that it's not just a service trip. They're not just going down and doing work and then kind of hanging out with themselves at the end of the day and just playing games, but it's an immersion. So we want our students to encounter a very unique American city, New Orleans, in all of its life. So they're going to be working in communities where there still are serious needs spawning from Hurricane Katrina, but also kind of encountering the full scope of New Orleans City. So that's its culture, that's its cuisine, that's a large-standing kind of pre-existent justice issues, racial issues, all those kinds of things that exist in this community. So our hope is that these students can go down and encounter these, maybe be placed by them, and also in the process kind of encounter the Catholic Church in New Orleans and Catholic communities and begin to ask deeper questions of faith and kind of their own relationship with God, and hopefully give them an opportunity to do that in a guided way and with the support of chaplains and campus ministry staff and great partners in New Orleans.
Can we talk a little bit about how the students prepare for the trip?
Yeah,
as you mentioned,
of course.
It's an immersion, it's not just a service trip. So my understanding is that the group comes together very early in the process and they continue to meet after they return.
Yep. So we have a it's a long process. So students apply in April for the program, and our application numbers vary every year. We take about 14 students in a given year, and we had, I think, 45 applicants this year. So they go through an interview process. We make program selections, and then they meet weekly throughout the course of the fall semester. And part of that is part of the goal of that is there's kind of a threefold goal with that. First is they're going to fundraise. So part of our program is exclusively dependent on donor funding, but also the group runs a huge meal auction where they auction off meals with some of the beloved faculty and staff on campus to the larger student community. And so they'll take a little bit of time to plan their fundraiser, to kind of work on all of these things, and then they'll also kind of build a community. So part of the goal here is we want our students to hit the ground ready to run and ready to focus on New Orleans. So as long as they're not worried about kind of building relationships and a community dynamic among themselves, if we can do that ahead of time, I think it helps us facilitate that a little bit better. So we build community over the course of those meetings, and then we learn about where we're going. This is everything from kind of learning the geography of New Orleans. So when somebody says when the industrial canal broke, you don't have to kind of go Google it, that you know exactly what that means. But also like when somebody references where the Lower Ninth Ward is, or where Jackson Square is, those kinds of things. So you just have a sense of the geography, the topography of New Orleans, but also learning about Hurricane Katrina, kind of the nature of the disaster and what the recovery has looked like, New Orleans culture. We take them to a jazz show over there, so we have an introduction to jazz, all those kinds of things. So we want them to have, I like to think of this section of the program as, this preparation part as kind of educating their vision in some ways, so that so they're not kind of blind observers, but they can walk in and kind of encounter New Orleans with kind of a rich vision. They can see things a little more intentionally and those kinds of things. So I think the heart of that preparation program is those three things. And then we also run a retreat that kind of deepens all three of those as well. So that's the prep, more or less. Yeah.
And so it's not like what you hear these stories about like disaster tourism or poverty tourism where people go and they'll take a bus tour of the Lower Ninth Ward.
I hope not. Yeah, I hope not. I think that's always something you have to be keeping. You have to have that critical voice in your head, I think, when you're kind of organizing trips like this at all times, because it could turn touristic. And I think there's a touristic gaze that's always vulnerable to kind of overcoming a trip like this. I think we combat that by trying to cultivate certain dispositions in our students, that obviously disposition to service and working with organizations that are, we believe, on the ground doing really good work, and that are working really well with the community in a very mutual way. But we also try to cultivate spiritual dispositions, I think, that allow them to be vulnerable, to encounter the other kind of for who they are, and to be changed in the process as well, and to really ask critical questions, so that it's not kind of a consumption of an experience, so to say, but this is rather hopefully a sharing between communities that everybody can grow in.
So how did that reflection continue during the trip itself in January, during winter break and beyond?
And beyond. Yeah. So after we're trying to get together again once or twice to do some debriefing. We do, there's a Mardi Gras party that's always hosted that we kind of give a presentation about the trip at. And then I usually meet one-on-one with them for coffee and those kinds of things to kind of, so there's the group narrative, right, which we're kind of handling in a larger setting. And then the one-on-one stuff is more for more personal one-on-one kind of reflections on what does this mean for your life moving forward? What are some questions maybe have been stoked? And kind of maybe some desires in your own heart that were maybe revealed in the course of doing this. And what are the questions you're now asking, or kind of trajectories maybe that seem more open to you at the moment?
Now, Bob, you've been going on this trip. You've gone on several trips now.
4 for this one. Yeah.
I'm curious, if you remember when the news of Katrina first occurred, if you remember hearing those news reports, and I'm curious how you reflect on during your own visits. Yeah,
I was a freshman here when Katrina hit. I was in the middle of freshman orientation, I believe, because it was late August, early September. And I came in from California. So I think at that point in my life, I wasn't watching as much news in the moment. But I do remember the discussions about it. And I feel like I can see my own kind of historical ignorance at the time of it. And so I think for me, it's allowed me to realize that, there's no default option often with this stuff, that you're not just going to encounter the depth of kind of that sort of tragedy and the issues that are associated with it, but you've got to go seek it out as well. This part of being an intelligent citizen in our country, I think, is built into that. I'm curious what it was like to go back this January after seeing all the news reports of all the tragedies that affected folks in Texas and Puerto Rico and the Virgin Islands and the rest of the Caribbean. Yeah, it's I think one of the things it's done for me is it's helped me understand a little bit more of the complexity of kind of recovery and redevelopment in the wake of a response of a disaster such as these sorts of things, such as Hurricane Harvey in Puerto Rico. And it's a long complex, difficult process that's influenced by a number of different variables that's hard to control. And it's hard to predict where it's going to go. One of the things that one of our partners said is anytime anyone, especially the one who's working in the lower Ninth Ward, they said anytime anyone puts an end date for recovery, they're just making it up. Like, we don't know when it's going to end, but certain areas by the flood wall, by the industrial canal in lower Ninth Ward are, I think, at 20-25% of occupancy post Katrina. And so, I think development happens in different areas. I think those with more access to resources, those are a little more wealthy, those kinds of things, better insurance policies, tends to come a little more easily, right? And so pockets of New Orleans you would never know. And then there's pockets that you're still driving around the city seeing the disaster response spray paint, right, on some homes. And it's shocking and it hurts, right? And so you look at Houston, you look at Puerto Rico, and that that's probably going to be the case, right, for a lot of communities within those cities, within Puerto Rico and within the city of Houston. And so one of the encouraging things, interesting, when we were down there is that connection was made. So St. Bernard Project, one of the organizations, they've been sending teams to Puerto Rico to help train local organizations in their model. I think they can build a house in, I think it's 60 or 61 days. They've become kind of masters at this, rebuilding homes in owner-occupied settings after disasters, in terms of like creating a very efficient process that I think does very well. So they've exported. They were in Joplin, Missouri in the tornadoes. They were up in Hurricane Sandy after in New Jersey. So they've kind of worked all around the country, and I think they're starting to move over to Puerto Rico as well. And I think they're in Houston too. So I think some of the lessons learned maybe from Katrina, at least from those organizations on the ground, are now being transported out, which is good. But you just see the long road, I think, and a very difficult, complex road too.
Well, I'm curious about the alumni of the program that you've gotten to know from your last 4 years, and I'm curious if from beyond that, where do they take these experiences in their career paths and life paths? Yeah,
I mean, I think any time to try to reduce a trajectory to a single variable is hard, right? But one of the things I have seen is students return with an openness or kind of deeper kind of appreciation for their faith, and for the relationship between faith and justice issues. I think they return with seeing certain social injustices and realities like that a little more clearly, which I think affects kind of how they make decisions in the long run. And so oftentimes I don't know that, we can 1 or 2 years out, you can say there's immediate changes in trajectory, those kinds of things. But I think what ends up happening is this becomes an experience, and it becomes an encounter, and something learned. It's formed your mind and your heart in ways that inevitably change how you make decisions over the long run if you're faithful to it. And I think we've seen that at some students going into nonprofit work, maybe entering into like a year of service after, those kinds of things. But even students kind of opening up and exploring their faith more deeply for the rest of their time at Providence College. I think in a lot of soft ways we see kind of anecdotally, right, these sorts of things happening.
So can you tell us a little bit about how it fits into the overall mission of campus ministry, a program like this and the other?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, so Catholic campus ministry, right, and serving the poor and care for the poor and the marginalized is at the very heart of our faith, right? In Matthew 25, it's the final judgment scene, but blessed are, whatever you've done to the least of these, you've done it to me, right? And so it's right at the very heart of the gospel. And so I think as a church, to be faithful to what it means to be church is to be a community that's seeking to serve and to be present with those on the margins. And I think the work of something like the NOLA Immersion is kind of at the very heart of that thrust of the church. And so when we are looking to kind of give our students opportunities for spiritual development, I think this is right on par, right in the very center of kind of what it means to be in the church. So, worshiping at St. Dominic's, going to praise and worship nights, learning about your faith, maybe being involved in a peer ministry group, and then serving in the local community. Those are all part of, I think, of a very integral, like holistic faith, that you can't have one without the other, I don't think. And I think they all go together deeply. And that to have a fully mature spiritual life is involved. You need all of those things. So for us, we try to provide those opportunities because not only do I find that students, oftentimes that's the best way for them to wade into the larger, more existential questions, but because even if they're already bought in on the faith stuff, you still need to be doing the service, right? You still need to be in your local community and asking those critical questions.
But the program isn't only intended for students who are Catholics, baptized, confirmed.
No. Yeah.
How does this help with evangelization on campus?
Yeah. I think I think we tend to have a cross section of a good number of students who aren't Catholic who participate. I can't speak comparatively to other programs, but I think NOLA has a wide spread of people who participate. And one of the ways I think that we try to do is, I'm up front with the students. Look, there's a Catholic campus ministry, and there's myself. I'm a Catholic lay campus minister. We'll have a priest on the trip as well, and we're going to be going to mass and those kinds of things. So there's going to be opportunities for reflection and spiritual life within the Catholic tradition. But we're not asking for necessarily you to have any starting point, just an openness to encounter it, and then we want to ask the questions you have with you. And I find that's a nice entry point for a lot of students. Is we're not in a way forcing it on them, but we're saying like we invite you to participate, and we want to see where it leads, and we want to ask questions with you, walk with you, enter into whatever kind of spiritual life you have, and hopefully find a way to grow in that. And I find it's a very valuable opportunity for that. I think in the question of evangelization, I think it's a good way for students to kind of wrestle with their faith in some ways, maybe and a good way to enter in maybe for the first time to these questions, because they're doing something they love. A lot of people have just a natural love for service, but we try to take it deeper into a deeper conception of Christian service and what's involved in that. And I think it's a good way for them to start asking those questions, and I think we see that. So
it definitely seems like an intense experience because they have very long days. Am I correct?
Yeah. And I feel like I'm not getting any younger. Yeah, the days are very long. So because we have all these cultural immersion elements, like a standard day kind of goes. We wake up 6:30 a.m., depart, and head out to service sites. You're there mostly till mid-afternoon. Stop home. Everybody gets showered, changed, head out for our evening activities. Those could be dinners with local alumni. We've got one alum, Lenny Alsfeld, class of 74, and his wife Cindy, who host us twice very generously. But also with, the Notre Dame ACE program house, with the local Catholic school teachers in the area, ready to go to a jazz show. And then we get home maybe 10 p.m. and then reflect until 11:30, maybe midnight, and then wake up and do it all again. So very little sleep, very busy days. That I think they're very rich days, though, for our students.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Bob, can you tell us a little bit about your own path to campus ministry? I mean, you graduated from Providence College in 2009. You had a degree in political science, and you mentioned also a minor in theology. Mm-hmm. But then where did you go from there, and how was your experience at Providence College helping you get on that road?
Yeah, I mean, it's a long story, but if I were to just pick a couple little integral parts. We, campus ministry didn't really, apart from NOLA, which I didn't really hear about until after, we didn't really offer any of these kind of immersion trips, so to say. So I, summer after my junior year, I found a program in Ukraine, kind of a post-Soviet Ukraine, that was teaching English to Ukrainian Greek Catholic seminarians. And I was a deep political science major, so kind of the fallout of the Soviet regime and asking questions of democratization, those kinds of things, fascinated me. And working with college students seemed to me to be, I was like, they're probably interested in these political questions as well, right? So I find a way to get there. Basically, the way the program was structured is if you can get yourself to Lviv, Ukraine, they cover all your costs when you're in country, and it's a 6-8 week program. So found a way to get to Lviv, and spent the summer living in a former orphanage and small little town, teaching English every day to Ukrainian Greek Catholic college students and seminarians. And I was talking with one of these students. I said, look, like, you've got this incredibly deep kind of enduring political issues in your country. There's divisions between the East and the West. There's cultural differences between Ukraine's affiliation with Europe, but also with Russia, right? There's long-standing kind of post-Soviet transition questions. And I said, what interests you? And the response was, I want to go to the East and build the church. And for me, it just kind of blew up the categories that I was using. And I found that, I was a very devout Catholic coming into college, and my faith only deepened over my time here, that I think a lot of the community and the justice issues that I was seeking, I think found their fulfillment in the church. And so I kind of was still a political science student, really interested in political structures and power and those kinds of things. But I found my heart running towards serving the church more deeply. So I continued my time. I ended up going to study theology at Notre Dame after. And then I ran a program after I graduated called the Common Good Initiative there, which provided similar opportunities for graduate students, but felt like I wanted to get into ministry. I love being in higher ed, but felt like I wanted to have a more ministerial relationships with students, at least felt called in that direction. And so the job opened up at Providence to become a campus minister. I applied, and I guess the rest is history. Yeah.
Very neat. So in addition to the NOLA Immersion program, you oversee a number of different service immersion experiences for students, correct?
Yeah. We have a handful of different things. So the other one that I oversee is we have international immersion trips that take place in end of May, start of June. Week-long trips. We have partners in Guatemala and in Jamaica. Similar structured program, preparatory on the beginning. We have a follow-up retreat after. We just got our applications in yesterday. So I oversee that, and then I oversee a couple local service opportunities. So we have a very vibrant Special Olympics partnership on campus where we host 2 basketball tournaments for Special Olympics Rhode Island. I oversee the student leaders who run that. And then we also have a Hunger and Poverty Awareness Club, which sends students to, I believe, 4 different organizations, and Friar Food Rescue, which kind of takes excess food waste from Sodexo and other on-campus events and donates it to local homeless shelters. So all those student leaders are involved. I oversee them indirectly in many ways. So,
and let's not forget Habitat for Humanity.
Well, not anymore. Yeah, we had a subtle adjustment. So I used to oversee Habitat for Humanity as well. But this year, Heidi Freitzel in our office is going to be doing it. But we send anywhere from 120 to 140 students, seems like, in a given year, to 9 different affiliates, Habitat affiliates throughout the Eastern Seaboard over spring break. So,
wow. So if we were to total the number of students who get experience with service.
Yeah, I can't give you the specific number. In a year or two ago, I think the number of individual students in campus ministry was around 500 who were involved in service in some way. So it's a large population of students. It's a wide swath. But that could be anything from they went to a Special Olympics basketball tournament to they're involved in an immersion trip, or they're doing 3 or 4 things and they've accumulated 50 hours over the course of the year of community service, right? But it's a large touch point, I think, for not only for campus ministry, but just for the school, for being involved in the local community.
But it's phenomenal that they have this opportunity to really address this facet of being a part of the church.
I agree.
Right here on campus.
I totally agree. Yeah, it is. It's I think college is a very important time in a person's life. And, I think college life schedules get very busy these days. I think students have a lot of pressure on them. But I hope our service opportunities and the wide swath of what we do in campus ministry is a chance for students to kind of pump the brakes, enter into more of a contemplative dimension of life, and kind of encounter God, encounter our Lord, and encounter their own selves in more profound ways, the kind of deeper questions they're asking, and kind of the deeper longings of their own hearts, and hopefully to live authentically to those.
Well, Bob, thank you so much for joining us and telling us all about the NOLA Immersion and the other service experiences that campus ministry has to offer.
Thanks for having me, Liz. It was a pleasure to be here.
Tashiyra, you were probably pretty young when Hurricane Katrina hit the region. Can you tell me what you remember from that time, from the news reports?
I honestly don't really remember much about Katrina. I remember learning about it and hearing about it, but I can't tell you specifically what I remember from exactly when it happened.
So why were you interested in the NOLA Immersion?
I was interested in NOLA Immersion because I've never been to New Orleans, and I read more about Katrina as I got to high school and learning about how much trauma it was to the residents in New Orleans. So I wanted to do a service-related trip, and I also had never done one before, so I didn't really know what it entailed. So I was ready to try something new and up for the challenge.
And how did you prepare for that first trip? What did you do as a group?
Every week we would meet on Monday nights, really late, usually like 9 p.m., and we'd meet weekly, and we have conversations about the culture, the food, Katrina, what levees are, the architecture, all different types and parts of New Orleans, just so we were familiar with the area before we went down there.
So with all that preparation, what was it like to see New Orleans during that first trip?
It was amazing, honestly. I remember one of our members who went on a trip with us last year. He did a presentation on the architecture and the different types of buildings, and we got down and we're like, oh, that's a shotgun house. So it was just great to see it actually in person and see all the stuff that we researched and how similar it was to the research that we saw.
So it actually really reflected what you had learned about. And so
Yes.
did anything surprise you?
I was very surprised when we went to Lower 9, which is the Ninth Ward, which is the most impacted part of New Orleans. And when we went there were still streets and that weren't filled with houses, vacant lots all around the town. And it just really shocked me because it's 12 years later and it's still not fixed yet.
What sorts of work were you doing there when you were on your first trip?
On the first trip, we went to an elementary school and we helped out there. And then we also went to work with lower9.org, which is an organization that's located in the Lower Ninth Ward and is focused on fixing homes in the Ninth Ward. And we did a lot of sanding and a lot of priming. And then we also worked with the St. Bernard Project, which is now known as SBP since they have moved to different regions throughout the U.S. And we worked on another home there, and we got to put up drywall and also paint the outdoor of the house, the outside of the house.
There's a lot of skills that you built here at Providence College that you've been able to put into practice.
Yeah.
Was that something you'd ever done before?
No, I'd never actually touched anything that had to do with construction. So it was really nice to be able to add some more expertise to my back pocket.
Now you know a little bit more about what's going on at Home Depot.
Yes.
Can you tell us a little bit more about some of the people that you met? Because my understanding is the program is very involved in trying to get you to know real people.
Yes. So we met a lot of different people throughout our week there. I say we probably met more than 10 new people that we got to actually get to know and hear their stories. So we met a couple, I do not remember their last names, but Mary and Bob. And they were victims of Hurricane Katrina. And Bob he worked for a news company. So he had to actually stay during Katrina. And he told what it was like, what his experience was like. And he actually lost contact with his wife and his kids at some part in between the storm. And just hearing their story was just incredible. And they came back. They were one of the first residents back in their neighborhood, and it was empty. It was still water and dirt everywhere. And he actually talked about how he built his home himself. He rebuilt the home himself with help from like church groups and stuff, but he didn't look for a contractor or anything because there was a lot of contractor fraud when the hurricane happened. And I just thought that it took a lot of perseverance, grit, and dedication to take all that time to fix your own home and make sure that you're going to come back home, because that's what he kept saying. He says, we're coming back home, we're coming back. And I think that's what a lot of residents in New Orleans think, and that's the goal for a lot of people. So it was nice to see that he actually was able to pursue that goal and accomplish it.
Like they weren't going to give up on the community, even when nature brought what it brought.
Exactly. And it did change his environment. The community that he lived in, it's not the same anymore. There were like the demographics of it changed after Katrina, which is another thing that I learned a lot about. Is just after Katrina, a lot of the original residents weren't unable to come back. The houses were just too expensive for them to afford, because this was a low-income area neighborhood before. Like the Lower Ninth Ward was a low-income area, and they were putting like $1 million houses there. And you see them when you're in New Orleans as well, and they stand out because they're not like the original architecture of New Orleans, like the shotgun houses. They're like these tall, colorful, vibrant houses. But they cost a lot, so it's harder for people to come back, and that's another thing that's affecting the retention rate of the original population.
So it sounds like they're being impacted by gentrification.
Yes.
Now, you returned to New Orleans this year as a student leader. I'm going to mess up your real title. What's your student coordinator?
Yes, I was a fundraising coordinator.
And you returned this year, after all of the devastating tragedies that impacted communities in Texas and other parts of the United States, Puerto Rico, the U.S. Virgin Islands, and the Caribbean, I'm curious what your response was to when you arrived in New Orleans after having heard all these news reports and then to see a recovering community.
The recent ones. Yeah, so we didn't hear much about the recent ones because it was in another area. It was more like the Baton Rouge area, which we weren't working in. But we heard from like the SBP Foundation. We worked with them again this year, and they were telling us about how they are actually like relocating because their motto is to allow, I don't know the exact language, but it's to get everyone back home. And they are relocating to Baton Rouge so that they can help the residents there and get them back in their homes. So I think that's really good that they have done like enough in New Orleans to the point where they feel comfortable to move to another part of Louisiana to help another part of the community. So I think they've relocated about a little less than half of the homeowners that they were working with.
Wow.
So yeah, and they still have more to go, but they have a 15 to 20 year track that they're working on to see if they can get everyone back in their homes that they've been working with.
Right. So the work isn't completely done, but they can expand their efforts and move on. I'm wondering how your experience in New Orleans, that first trip, impacted your sort of perception or understanding of what was happening in Texas and Puerto Rico, and it's still continuing in Puerto Rico today.
Mm-hmm. So after going to like New Orleans the first time and having so many different like stories be told to me and having so many different like views and outputs on what happened with Katrina and just learning more about a lot of the like fraudulent activity that was going on, it made me question a lot of like the help that was going out towards Puerto Rico and Texas because I didn't want it to be like a repeat of Katrina the first time. And I know that it's gonna be, those areas are like really bad and like they were badly hit. So I really hope that everyone's learned from Katrina and is able to give them the right help that they need and the sufficient help.
So it sounds like you were more skeptical about
yes,
some of the assistance that people were trying to provide or saying they were trying to provide.
Yes, it definitely made me more skeptical because I just didn't even know that contractors can like get away with like saying they're going to help someone and they're not doing it. And a lot of people probably don't know either, especially if you're like a first-time homeowner or it's a house that's passed down, so you don't have the paperwork to prove stuff. And it's just a lot that goes into like owning homes and when disasters happen, like having the necessities to fix it.
It does seem particularly outrageous. Like these folks have been victimized more than once, right?
Right.
First by the disaster itself and then by people trying to take advantage. It's
exactly.
Really wrong. Can you talk a little bit about what happens now? We talked about your preparation for the trip. What happens now that you and your NOLA crew are back on campus?
So now the group this year was actually a really close group. So we have been staying in contact a lot. We want to have a reunion. Don't know if we'll have the time. We all have different schedules, but I know a lot of people are continuing to go on other service-based trips, especially after New Orleans. A lot of people had never done service trips before New Orleans, and now they're like, I love service. I want to do more. What other opportunities are there? So I know a couple of people are applying to like the Guatemala trip, and I'm personally going to Argentina to teach ESL after graduation for 2 weeks. And I just, the trip solidified my like belief in service and the power of the people and how volunteering can go a long way, even if you only work on one house or do one small thing and it may seem tedious at the time. You are making a difference and you are helping the larger picture.
And that's kind of one of the goals of the program in general, right? The participants in the NOLA Immersion are asked to try to facilitate social change in their lives going forward. So you already given us one clue. I mean, I'm curious, you're a senior, not to put pressure on you to have, firm plans, but I mean, I'm curious how this affected your thoughts about your own future beyond those 2 weeks in Argentina. Are you thinking differently about your role and your career path and life goals as a result?
Yes, definitely. I guess I can say I'm very service driven. I don't need any financial reward or any compensation for like the work that I do, which is why I want to go into urban teaching. I recently got accepted to a program called Urban Teachers through Johns Hopkins University, and that's where I plan to go in the fall.
Fantastic. So you'll be based in Baltimore?
Well, the school is in DC, but I'll be going through Johns Hopkins.
Fantastic. And can you tell us a little bit about the immersion program, how it's organized in terms of fundraising and how because it's pretty egalitarian in that lots of people can participate because the costs are kept pretty low.
Right. So every year we have our annual NOLA mail auction. I don't know if you're aware of it, but we ask around campus. First we come up as a group with a bunch of like professors, faculty, staff, coaches, anyone who's like pretty popular and that we know that students on campus will want to have a meal with. And then we email them, ask them if they'd be willing to host a meal. And they don't have to pay to host a meal. The way it works is they provide the meal, and that's however they want. They can take them to a restaurant. They can make a home-cooked meal. They provide the description to us, and we just provide it to the students. And then the students bid on it at the meal auction. So our fundraising comes from students. And then this year, I actually was like, maybe we should get more money because I didn't feel like the meal auction went as well as I wanted it to go. So it's like, we need more money. Can we do a food run? And Bob was like, okay, we can. So I said, what if we do beignets, which is a famous New Orleanian dessert? Or in other words, we call them like Iggy, Doughboys, or fried dough.
Rhode Island tradition.
Yes. And he was like, that's a great idea, but where are we going to get them? And I was like, we can make them. And we did. And we raised a lot of money, and we were able to have sufficient funds and even more funds while on the trip. And also the funds transfer over to the following year. So
fantastic. So you're paying it forward. So you're helping other students in future trips with their assistance. Now, the meal auction, can you tell us a little bit about some of the pairings between the hosts and the meals? Because this is a huge tradition at BC's campus that people look forward to every year.
Right. Well, it's honestly just if the students are interested and someone that they see, a favorite professor, they decide. And especially when it's like Coach Cooley and Dean Sears and all the like big names people on campus, it gets a little heated during the meal auction. Everyone's like going up like $250, $350, and whoever has the highest bid just wins the meal. And they can split it with someone else if they win and they want to, and they don't have enough friends. Say it's a meal for 4 and they only have 3 people. They can invite the person that they were going against. Do you want to come have a meal with us as well? Since we have one more spot open. And so far, everyone's had a pretty good experience with the meal auction. We're not exactly responsible for what happens after, but everyone's been very responsible with keeping in contact with each other. We put them in contact, and they make the dates are either set already, and they just meet them when they have the date set, or they come up with a date together that works for them, everyone.
Do you remember what the most popular meal was this year?
Probably going to the Capitol Grill with Bob Driscoll.
Yeah, that'll do it.
Yep.
Yeah. Tashiyra, if there's someone who was thinking about the NOLA experience going forward, what would you want to tell them about it? What do you think that would be something that they should know about the trip?
I think that mindset matters when you're going on a trip. If you have a mindset that you're going in to fix something or help people, and that's the only thing you have set in your mind, then this trip isn't for you, because you're gonna learn more than what you get. Like, you're gonna get more than what you give, or receive more than what you give. And by that I mean that it's not only a trip where we're helping, but we're also being taught and learning more about the culture, and everyone showing so much hospitality and being willing to allow us into their homes, allowing us to help them. So it's just not enough to just come in with the mindset of, what am I going to do for you? You should also think about, what am I going to receive from the people that I'm helping? What can I learn about myself as I go forward with this trip? What are my fears? What are my goals by the end of the trip? I think that's definitely very important, is to think about something you're afraid of about the trip. Maybe it's going to a new city and not having been there. Maybe it's not knowing if you'll like the food. Maybe it's, I don't know if I'm going to get anything out of this. And that's why I think it's important to address your fears as well as set a goal. So if your fear is something along the lines of, I don't know what I'm going to get out of the trip, what do you want to get out of the trip? And make it happen.
Well, I kind of want to throw this back at you now. So what was your mindset going into this, and what did you gain from it?
So when I went, originally the first time, I was like, my goal was to gain a closer relationship with God. And that was one of the main reasons why I went on, because I know that there was also a friar coming on the trip. And I know that it was through campus ministry, so it was a faith-based trip. And I was also scared of that at the same time, because I'm not as in touch with my religion as I would like to be. So I went to Mass. When they held Mass, when we went to St. Joan of Arc Church, when they invited us and welcomed us into their church, I got up and sang the songs with them, and I just made the most out of the experience as I could. I talked to Father Dom more, because I'd never talked to a priest before. So I just continued to be active and getting in touch with my religion. I prayed at night. I wrote in my journal, and that actually helped me. And that was one of the reasons why I wanted to go back a second time, was to keep maintaining that relationship with God that I had developed while I was out there.
So what was your religious background in preparation before this? Because it's very much a faith-based program, but it is open to people of all faith backgrounds.
Right. So I'm not Catholic at all, and I don't really claim a denomination. I just knew that I believed in God, and that was it. But that wasn't enough for me. So I was just seeking God in another way, and I'm in the process of trying to see which denomination I would like to go to. So being more open-minded and going to different churches and talking to different people and going to Mass on campus has really helped.
So you're still discerning. You're trying to go through this
Yes.
faith process, but you saw this really as an opportunity to kind of be an intense immersion in the faith tradition as well.
Yes.
That's phenomenal. So you're still looking, you're still seeking, but it helped you get that journey started with that.
Definitely.
Can you talk a little bit about the reflection aspect of the trip? Because that's built into the schedule, right?
Yes.
Baked in?
That's, no matter how late we come back, we're going to reflect at the end of the night. So every night we'd reflect, and we had reflection questions that we could go off of. Bob provided a little booklet, and it would have a scripture related to kind of what we were doing that day. So the first day it'd be a scripture related to nerves and what you're looking forward to and stuff like that. And then when we had our first day, it was a scripture related to doing service, and by halfway point it was a scripture related to not getting slacking off and not getting tired. And every night we'd reflect, and we'd either go off of those reflection questions or we'd come up with our own as coordinators. And this year we decided to do both. So we would have people individually reflect. We all had journals that we wrote in, and we'd just play music and write for 10 minutes independently, because we had a group that loved to journal. So we took it to our advantage and we put it into our reflection time. And then we'd share if people didn't want to share, which tended to be pretty common. We'd have other backup questions, which was where my question about what do you fear? What are your goals? Another question I had, what's one thing about this trip that has that you think you'll take back with you as you go back to PC and back into your community? So just broader questions, applying what we've done and what we've learned that day and applying it back to our real life, so that we know it's not just a a week experience, and it's not something that's going to be lost. It's something that we can continue to apply throughout the rest of our lives.
It's kind of amazing you guys had the stamina to do this because your days started pretty early too, right?
Yes. So we'd wake up, we'd have to be out. The earliest we had to be out one morning was 6:30 a.m. And it was tough because the night before we had got back at like 11 p.m. and we still had to reflect after that. So, but generally we woke up around 8 and left by 8:30, and then we'd come back around 10 p.m.
Where do you stay, and what's the meal situation like?
We stayed in We stayed in Aurora Methodist Church, which is in Algiers, New Orleans, and it was really cheap and it's very convenient. All the girls are in one room, all the boys are in one room. It's a bunk bed, and for meals, we had to go to Winn-Dixie, which is the common grocery store down there. And we would eat bagged lunches every day. If we didn't eat out or go to someone's home, we just cooked that night at the church. They had an industrial kitchen there.
All right, so you'd come back after this long day of sanding and scraping and painting and have to make dinner for yourself like real grown-ups?
Yes.
But it wasn't all hard work. There were some relaxing moments, right?
Yes, there were quite a few. When we went to people's homes, it was relaxing. I wouldn't say that it was a burden or hard work but it was nice just to interact with native New Orleanians and hear their stories. We went to the ACE House, which is Catholic Teaching Master's Program through Notre Dame, and they provide it's for people to get their masters and teach Catholic schools.
Oh, Providence has a program like that, the PACT program.
Yes, yeah. The PACT program. That Providence is a section off of the Notre Dame ACE program, and we actually have an alum who is in that program, Alex Nunnally, and we got to meet up with him. And he also went on a NOLA trip, so it was just like a full circle. But it was nice to hear about their experiences and just talking about how it is as someone who's not originally from New Orleans, how is it now living in New Orleans in comparison to what our the other guests that we saw who were natives of New Orleans.
Right, to experience the reconstruction from their view.
Yes.
From a native.
And then we also went to the Pelicans game, which was really great. This year we went to a Pelicans game. They won. It was a very close game, and I'd never been to an NBA game, so it was nice to check that off my bucket list. And then last year we went to a symphony because they weren't playing at the week that we were down there. And it was really nice. I teared up a little bit. And I didn't know that music would do that to me, but it was really beautiful to hear all the different instruments playing in tune with each other.
Was that your first experience at the symphony as well?
Yes.
Wow.
A lot of firsts on this trip.
Now, the Pelicans experience is hosted by a PC alum, is that correct?
Yes. Lenny Ausfeld, he is, I don't know his class here, but he was the last all-boys class, and he was also on the hockey team. And he's just a great man, full of stories, full of humor, resources, connections. He's great for anyone who goes to New Orleans and wants to have someone. He will definitely take you in as his own. Him and his wife are just amazing. They had hosted a meal for us and also brought us to a Pelicans game. What more can you ask for?
He is a phenomenal supporter of PC and particularly this program. Tashiyra, thank you so much. I really appreciate this opportunity to talk with you about your experience. Thank you for joining us on the Providence College podcast.
Thank you.